Hi, Sean Holyfield, CEO and founder of Amazing Workplace. I was asked to put together this video by several other executives that I was in contact with over the holidays, and I was trying to find a meaningful way to connect what you see on the screen to workplaces and creating an amazing workplace and building on happiness. So it's a little bit of a stretch, but here's what I'm going to go with. One of our core values at Amazing Workplace is something called do the impossible. And what that simply means for us is that when you're confronted with something that's very difficult or seemingly impossible, finding a way to creatively overcome that obstacle in order to accomplish that goal is one of the core values that we celebrate as a company. So here's the backstory. My 2.5-year-old son loves a show called Paw Patrol. For those that know what I'm talking about, you'll probably be very interested and or think this is cute. For those that don't, thanks for just enduring it. But Paw Patrol is a cartoon that features Ryder, who somehow is a 10-year-old that has like all this science background, tech background, and must be a billionaire because he can build anything in the cartoon. And then he has a set of pups or small dogs, they're puppies, Paw Patrol. And this patrol of pups goes around Adventure Bay and they help people and protect them and save them from bad things. And it's a pretty cute cartoon. I've actually watched a lot of Paw Patrol with my son. And as you can imagine, if you have a cartoon like Paw Patrol and it's wildly successful, like Paw Patrol has been, they make a lot of toys. And I mean, when I say a lot of toys, it's almost an endless supply of toys that are available for parents to purchase for their children. So as my son has really fallen in love with Paw Patrol, and as my son has wanted to get more toys and play with the stuff and watch more cartoons and made requests and so forth and so on, we, of course, have complied and have got him lots of these toys. But as we were coming into the holidays this last year, one of his special requests was what you see on the screen in front of you right now, which is something called the Robosaurus. So it's a robot dinosaur or Robosaurus. And he fell in love with this cartoon. Like he wanted to watch it over and over and over again. Now, as a parent, I was really interested in trying to satisfy his desire to have this toy because I knew it was something that he really wanted coming up in the holidays. He'd even asked Santa for it. And unfortunately, of all the toys that the Paw Patrol people, the people that own that intellectual property, manufacture and make, this just happens to be one of the things that they don't make, which as a parent was a little frustrating at the time. And I went down the path of many options of how on earth am I going to create or make a robot dinosaur that looks like the one here on the screen, in a way that like really captures the way that it looks and in a way that he really loves. So that was the dialogue that I had with my son as we were talking about what he wanted coming into the holidays. So I started looking at photos of this thing and trying to figure out like how would I do this. And then as the dialogue went on and the days went on and we're getting closer and closer to the holidays, and you can see some of these date stamps up here. This is from December 4th, right? I'm pulling pictures on December 4th, 21 days before Christmas. And my son then shares with me that what he really wants is a life-size Robosaurus. In other words, he wants this robot dinosaur to be as tall as him. Now, this is all about do the impossible. Like as a core value, it's something that we practice all the time at work. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, I practice this all the time at work. I'm sure I can probably figure out a way to do this. So it started with, okay, well, if you really want a Robosaurus that's your height, I need to know how tall you are. So, but you see here in the little measuring stick, he's 33 inches tall, or 33, 32, depending on whether or not he's leaning back or not. And that was really the starting point is like, how do I create a 31, 32, 33 inch tall Robosaurus, right? So the very first thing I did was I found an image of the Robosaurus from the cartoon because they don't have 3D models of this thing online. Normally you can find these things. Normally, I mean, I can't count the number of times that I've actually gone in and researched something and been able to find like amazing drawings and diagrams or 3D models, or somebody's maybe made a 3D model kit of something over the years. But this particular dinosaur, this robot dinosaur. There's just nothing. There's nothing anywhere. I looked everywhere. I scoured the internet, contacted artists. I mean, I really went all out trying to find a solution for how can I do this quickly or easily. And what I ended up with was I'm going to have to do this from scratch. Like, I mean, this is just complete from scratch, like bare bones. Got to get my hands, got to get a pen, got to start drawing this stuff out. So my starting point was I was able to find a single image, which you see here on the screen, of the Robo Dinosaur from the side. With that image, I then needed to create a full scale version of that I had to hand draw. And you can see here, I pieced together pieces of cardboard, pieces of paper, and I hand drew from scratch this profile that you see here onto this giant cardboard display that you see. Not particularly pretty, but nevertheless, it was a good starting point, because what that gave me was the scale or the size of all of the details of this particular robot dinosaur that I wanted built, all in the theme of do the impossible. I'm going to keep tying this back to work. So here's a slightly like zoomed in version of that profile of the Robo Dinosaur. And as I was looking at this thing, what stuck out in my mind was that, okay, I'm going to have to break this into pieces. There's the tail, which is its own thing. There's the torso, which looks like an egg. There's the head, which is shockingly big, because if you actually take that image of the head and you turn it sideways, it's taller than the distance from the feet to the top of the torso. Like, I just started mathing out the weight and the size and like, how am I going to do this? Right. But step one is I had to get a drawing. Like, I had to actually know what it was I was going to have to do. I had to like sketch this thing out. So you can see here another image of my having done that. And then it was all about taking those pieces of this drawing, especially that center torso area initially, and then creating a structure that was solid enough or rigid enough to withstand a 2.5-year-old's punishment. For those that don't know, a 2.5-year-old boy, at least in my experience, is not the same as a 2.5-year-old girl. My daughters, I could sit them down, I could give them something, they would play with it, and they would be great. My son, I give it to him, and it's like he's like a test pilot in the military, or he's like somebody who tests things to ensure that they're structurally sound and that they won't break, meaning that he will pick them up, he will throw them, he will climb on them, he will chew on them, and he will do anything and everything to an object to see whether or not it can withstand his strength and or his ability to test it. So I knew that it wasn't enough for me to create this robot dinosaur out of paper or out of some flimsy material. It needed to have like a solid core structure, which I decided to go with wood. So I started to cut out the little pieces of the oval for the torso. You can see here I was cutting out the circles to be able to put in the PVC structure for the actual robot dinosaur. And here's an example of the hole that was done. And then in order to make sure that I could build this thing in a way that it wasn't too heavy, but still had some structural solidity, I decided to go with foam as the filler, or the guts, if you will. And I chose a dense foam that you can get at Home Depot, which is, I think, where I got this. And then I needed to cut that foam. So I got a foam cutter, which is kind of like a table saw, but it's a foam cutter. It's got like a wire that gets really, really hot. Bought this online. Thank you, Amazon, for delivering this quickly. And that's where I started with the torso. Started putting these pieces together to assemble these pieces of the torso and glue them together, which took some time. You can see this is December 12th. So I'm now a few days down from our initial conversation and height measurements, and starting to get a little nervous about this project that I've committed to. And you can see here, this is the area that I was focused on, which is that center torso as a starting point. Also started to create some of the feet, the bottom of the feet, which you can see here that I cut out. I numbered them foot 1, foot 2, super sophisticated numbering structure. Here's foot 1, there's foot 2. And then I chose an upside down potted plant as kind of the starting point for the shape of those feet, which you can see the picture in the background. Then I kind of rolled back into the main torso, which I had glued, and started playing with how do I connect all these pieces. The Robosaurus had sort of thin pipe-like connectors, legs and arms, PVC piping. made a lot of sense to me, but it needed to be strong enough to hold the weight. So I needed to kind of play with that a bit and use lots of Gorilla Glue. Here are some dry fittings of the PVC pipes. Here's my clamping that kind of skeletal structure inside of the two pieces of wood with the foam sandwiched in between. I actually got a lot done on December 12th. I'm looking at the dates of this. Then I started playing with the head, which I was really fortunate to find a couple of shapes that were at Hobby Lobby and at Michael's, which are hobby shops or like arts and craft shops. Was able to find some half circles or domes, both of which were almost exactly the right size for the chin and for the top of the Robosaurus's face, kind of that nose area. Put those together and then did some foam cutting to get the front of where the eyes go, which you can see here. Then moved over onto the hands. Got a lot done on the 12th. Just looking at the date stamp, you can see the time. It's getting later and later in the evening. Started to clamp that stuff down, put it to the side, stacked up the feet and made some room to do some other things, and then really got busy getting into the hands as we were approaching 10 o'clock at night. Playing with the hands more, attaching them to the pipes. This is very, very rough, right? Started sketching this stuff out and finally kind of did some reference images back. Had the next day a day with my son at school. And then on the 13th that evening, started back up at about 8:30, working on the feet for the Robosaurus. And as I went through this process, I kept running into obstacles, things that were increasingly impossible. It was impossible to figure out how to get the sides of the face done right with the foam. I knew that I needed to find a way to make sure that the torso was strong enough to withstand his punishment. You'll see here I'm cutting out more of the foam for the sides of the torso. Began to glue the feet to the base. I used the wrong glue, thinking it was going to work. Ended up having to switch to Gorilla Glue pretty much everywhere. The expanding Gorilla Glue that like gets the little foam stuff everywhere. Then I started to attach the foam to the outsides of the torso and sand that down and cut it with a kind of a hot wire in order to shape that. You'll see here that that's what I was doing here. Began to attach the foam to the back of the head for the Robosaurus in order to get the right shape. Had to clamp all that, let that dry. And I guess the 13th was probably a weekend day because I did several weekend days, seeing the time here in the middle of the day. Was clamping that down. The tail was great because it was a nice single piece that I knew I could connect and actually work on separately. It ended up being the lightest piece, which is really the opposite of what I wanted, which is something I had to solve later as a do the impossible task. And then continued with the main torso, wrapping it with a coating of a putty, like a hardening putty that you can sand. Started to attach the foam to the feet, and then of course trying to get the sides of the face with the cheeks, or rather the jawline coming in to the main point. You could see the bottom sticking out that had not been fixed yet. Then needed to handle the dinosaur's fins on his back, if you will. I'm calling them fins. There's probably a different word for that. You'll see here that they were correct in terms of like the side, the shape, and they were obviously scaled up. And those are some of my templates that I had drawn and cut out with scissors and paper. This is that putty that I mentioned, the rock hard water putty. I don't own stock in this company, but that stuff works like magic. Just add water and mix. Added more of that to this. Then let it dry so that I could sand it a couple days later. And this is where things got really difficult. So in the journey of Do the Impossible, one of the things that I knew I was going to have to confront was adding a self-hardening clay to the outside of the Robosaurus that would allow me the freedom to actually sculpt and shape the details of the Robosaurus. Now, there's a lot of products in the marketplace that claim that they do this pretty well. And Milliput is great. It's what's called an epoxy. There's like two substances that you mush together, and you have to sit there and just squish it together over and over and over again. You have to knead it, if you will. And then you've got anywhere from 45 minutes to a little bit over an hour to play with it. You can use water to kind of smooth it out. And it really is a lot like clay. And then it does self-harden, and it doesn't shrink, and it doesn't crack. And you can even sand it and or do other things with it, which is great. It's a great, great substance. The problem is the volume of this material that I needed. I grossly underestimated the amount of milliput and or self-hardening clay that was going to be needed to coat this entire Robosaurus. So when I first got started, I think I had maybe 2 or 3 of those little boxes of milliput in the back of my mind thinking, oh, this will be fine. And then I kept having to order more and order more. And then ordering containers, 5-pound containers, and mixing this stuff up in like giant balls in order to attach it to the foam to give it that hardened outside structure that would withstand a 2.5-year-old's punishment. So you can see here, I was kind of playing with the hands. It's the first time I'd ever used milliput. I'd actually never used this material before in my life. Like years ago in high school, I did some sculpting with clay. And then in undergrad and in law school, I did some stone sculpture, but I'd never done this material. So this was definitely very new for me. Absolutely a do the impossible task. But I kept looking at the pictures of the Robosaurus and using my fingers to smooth it out. Watched a lot of YouTube videos. Thank you, YouTube. Thank you for all the people that helped me that have never even met me. And then I really jumped in and I started working on the toes because I wanted to actually get a part of the Robosaurus done that I felt like looked good to give myself the confidence that I could actually achieve this impossible task. I mean, here we are on December 14th. We're getting closer and closer to the deadline of the 25th. And I wasn't entirely confident I could get this done at this time. So this particular afternoon was really a great moment for me because it allowed me to look at the progress of what I had done and to have that confidence. Hey, if I can do these toes and make them look pretty good, which I felt like they look pretty good, I think I can do this whole thing. So I continued to work on this and move forward and continued to work on the head piece and the torso piece. You'd seen that the tail was initially done, and then added some of the putty and cutting of the bottom of the head. And then I jumped in. I was like, okay, I'm going all in on this milliput. So I added that clay to the outside of the torso now, and started to put the little lines that were in the metal plates from the Robosaurus. I used a clay sculpting device. I'm calling it a device. It's something you use in clay sculpture. It's kind of like a scalpel, but it's not super sharp. In any event, I use that to kind of smooth things out and do some of this work. And then put the Robosaurus's spines or fins kind of inside of that clay. You can see there that I've got the PVC piping coming in. And then just started to work on this and get it smoother and smoother. Moved over to the head, which needed a lot of work. And I knew this is probably where I was going to spend most of my time, which is true, by the way. I spent a lot of time working on the head. Let this stuff dry. Started to then work on the tail using what you see here is a foam cutter that you can buy again on Amazon, and use that to kind of cut off the pieces of foam in the shape that I wanted them. And then came back in with a sander and actually sanded that, which you can see at some point here later on. Here again, kind of going back to the main torso and a giant glass of iced tea coming into the evening. I'm sanding the tail all along, thinking to myself, I got to get this done. I've got to find a way to get this done. Every night, I actually sat down and wrote out what I was going to do the next day on a piece of paper. And if you're trying to do the impossible, whether that's something that you're trying to do at work or whether it's something you're trying to do in your personal life, planning out your next steps and understanding exactly what you plan to get done the next day is a great way to keep yourself on target and to keep yourself aligned with what you want to accomplish. So I would definitely recommend sitting down and writing down a list of things that you plan to get done. Look at that list, do it the night before, pick it up the next day, and then roll with it. So here with the tail, you can see that I've done some sanding. And then right next to the tail, there's that big blob of gray material. And that was a larger blob, if you will, of the milliput stuff, which I then attached to the tail here in a few images. But here's the head. There it is. There's the tail. You can see I'm starting to put the milliput or the clay, self-hardening clay on the outside of the tail. Coming back to the head, adding the little teeth, if you will, to the front of the jaw. And there's the tail in progress, trying to smooth that out. That was definitely quite some effort. Now all the way to December 20th. So this is, 5 days before Christmas. I wasn't nearly as far along as I thought I would be. But I started to plan even more, I guess, in detail. And I spent more time really figuring out what I was going to do next. And I knew that I really needed to start in on the head. So I started to do the clay on the head later that day, started to do the jawline. And the problem with the head is that it's so large that I could only do one side in clay before flipping it over, letting that dry and then flipping it over and doing the other side. So I started to do one side, adding the clay to one side, and then up around the bottom. And at this point, I had the tail, the torso, and the feet mostly done, as you can see here. And it was really important that I did what I call a dry fit. So I wasn't gluing all this in place. I was just assembling things loosely and just seeing, okay, is this thing going to stand up or is it going to fall over? Am I going to have to glue this to some sort of base to prevent it from falling over? Is my son going to climb on this and is he going to crush it? So I had to do some tests, some weight tests, kind of pressing down on it. Fortunately, all of the decisions I made up to this point worked. The PVC was strong enough. The wood base and the internal structure that I created, the kind of the skeleton, if you will, worked out really well. So I was feeling pretty good. It's December 21st, 11:18 a.m. I then continue to work on this throughout the day, and I'm using hot glue and other methods to attach foam coverings for the spines in the back so that my son doesn't get splinters and or hurt his hands on the wood. I then finally do permanently attach the tail to the torso for the first time. And you can see here that that's what I was doing here, gluing that, letting that set, knowing that I probably needed a day for that to dry. I then added some additional details to the feet. There, started to work on the joints for the arms and the elbows and where the wrists meet the hands. And that's this process here of grabbing these balls and attaching that, again, all with this mindset of like, hey, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to solve this. I'm going to figure this out. Here you can see that the Rubosaurus's head is starting to come along. For the nose, I used a couple of the little connectors that you use if you're doing internal wiring in your house. To take two wires, you put it in those little red things and you twist them and it twists the wires together. It was just the right shape. I ended up doing a lot of that throughout this process. Is just going back to the store, finding is there anything in the store that looks like this shape? And I had like a picture of the Rubosaurus as I was going to the store. People must have thought I was crazy. People probably think I'm crazy for having done this. Continue to add the clay around the head, the joints, and now we're coming into the getting through the 21st, and I've now got clay at least around the entire head. I'm feeling a little better. I got the little curl up at the top that I'm working on for the Rubosaurus's main fin that's kind of bent over. And you can see here, it's still pretty rough, right? And still working on this, letting this stuff dry. It's now 9:39 p.m. Continuing to work on this. And then I put little eyes in 11:20 p.m. So I'm coming up on midnight, but I'm feeling better about the Rubosaurus at this point. I knew I still had a lot of work to do, but I was feeling much better about doing the impossible. Wrote down a full list of things that I needed to get done for the next day. And then for the most part, just called it a night. Took a few more photos and then went in. So next day, I wasn't able to get to the Rubosaurus until later in the day. There's a bunch of stuff that I needed to do, but I was able to put together the arms and get those, again, loose fitted into the Rubosaurus. I was able to get the neck on and add the glue in order to kind of keep that thick neck in place, and was starting to feel better about this process at this point. I felt like I was seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and I was getting a lot closer. Knew that I needed to get back to the hands, so I went back to the hands and did some work on the hands. Decided to go outside, give it a little bit of air. You can see the smiley face on the bottom of the neck, and was preparing to give it a base coat of paint. So was working on this outside. And then I came back in and started to sand all of the details around the face of the Rubosaurus in order to make sure that I was actually the way that I wanted to look. And then base coated it. And here we are on the 23rd. Needed that to dry, added the metal paint. Now it's the 24th, the day before Christmas. I'm adding the green paint, leaving some of the details of the steel or the metal to show. And I finally get this thing all assembled at 8:38 on the 24th. It's now on a base that I attached it to so it didn't fall over, and was able to get the yellow dots painted on this thing late at night, let this dry, and later that evening pulled into the house just to verify the height because I told my son it was going to be as tall as he was, 32 inches, a little over 32 inches. So about his height, give or take a half an inch. Then I got that into the house next to the Paw Patrol toys that I mentioned that we bought him a lot of. And then he came in Christmas morning. And this was his response as he looked around at the toys. And pretty much every day since then, he's come in and hugged the Robosaurus daily. And he bangs on it, plays on it. He does climb on it. But all this is really just to illustrate that if you sit down and decide something's impossible, it's impossible. But if you actually make the time to plan something out and you actually find a way to get it done and you sit down and you write out the things that you need to do, you can make anything possible. For me, I was motivated by my 2.5-year-old son who had this passion and dream of having this life-size Robosaurus. And I thought to myself, hey, I'm kind of arts and craftsy. I can do this. I definitely got in over my head. I definitely was way out of my league in terms of the things that I knew how to do. But there's a lot of tools and resources available online to kind of help you do these things. And in the end, the result was worth every minute I spent. So that's how the Robosaurus helped remind me how valuable it is to actually embrace and use that core value of do the impossible. And that's how I'm tying all this back into Amazing Workplace. For the executives out there that asked me to do this, you're welcome. For others, I hope you enjoyed this.